Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Returning Favorites panel. We hope you've been enjoying the day so far. My name is Ashely Raynor. I'm a librarian at NORC at the University of Chicago, and I'll be moderating this session. This is going to be so much fun, mainly because all the books are so different. Like there's not an overarching theme, except for everyone coming back, to being a returning favorite. They're kind of all over the place, and that's wonderful because we get to really get a wide breadth of different topics and styles and everything. I'm so excited to welcome our panelists, Gina Apostol, author of La Tercera by Soho Press, William Landay, All That Is Mine I Carry With Me, published by Bantam, Curtis Sittenfeld, romantic comedy, published by Random House, Brendan Slocumb, Symphony of Secrets, published by Anchor, and finally, J. Ryan Stradal, author of Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club, published by Pamela Dorman Books. Hello, everyone. Okay, great. I have so many questions, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. My first question is for J. Ryan, author of Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club. I am very much a city girl, but I'm also a Midwesterner, which means that I've heard a lot about supper clubs. I've never been. I find the idea where everyone knows your name very appealing. Have you spent time in supper clubs, or did you have to learn about them and do research and eat a lot of delicious fish for this book?
I wish. I wrote most of this book during the pandemic, where I simply had to think about being in a restaurant and couldn't actually be in one. Like 2 of the 3 years I was writing this book, I didn't set foot in a restaurant. But in terms of supper clubs, I worked in one as a teenager. I worked at Steamboat Inn in Prescott, Wisconsin, which was the town across the river from my hometown of Hastings, Minnesota. And I absolutely loved it. And I'd been going to them my whole life. There was one outside of my hometown where kids ate for free on their birthday. So that's where we ate on my birthday. And I just love that unique blend of neighborhood casual restaurant with fine dining and peculiar regional fare, like relish trays. Depending where you are in the Midwest, fish fries or fish boils. And just the heaping amount of comfort food that you get. You can usually eat for 2 or 3 days after sitting in one. And I'd always wanted to write about it. And I finally got the chance to, or took the chance to.
The relish tray was what was getting to me because I love pickled things. And I was like, oh, I really could use one of those while I'm reading this book. So maybe I'll have to make my own. That sounds awesome. My next question is for Gina, author of La Tercera. I love how the town of Salado felt like a character in this novel. It's really well realized. I feel like I was there. Honestly, I know that's like kind of a cliche, but I really did feel like I was there. How do you think about describing a place in a way that makes it feel like the reader's there? How do you think about that? How does that look?
Right. Thank you so much for that question. I'm so glad that you found it to be like almost a character, because that town is the town where my mom grew up, and it had such a powerful effect on me. It's so powerful that I actually couldn't use the town's actual name, Barugo. The name Barugo had such a huge meaning. It had no electricity until the 1990s. It seemed stuck in time. It was like a Macondo. It was like Macondo, the Garcia Marquez town, before I had even read Garcia Marquez. So all the other place names in the novel were real place names, Tacloban, Manila, Diliman. But weirdly, given your question, I gave my mom's hometown, Barugo, a different name, Salugo. Salog means river, precisely because it was so important to me and real to me that in order to imagine it better, I needed to obscure it. And I think what allowed me to create it so vividly actually was that I separated myself from it in some way. Giving it a different name paradoxically allowed me to recreate it more fully, in my view, because you're right. The town of Salugo is the memory lode of that novel. It is the bedrock of memory, the river of childhood, history, love, nation, revolt, all of the things that are packed into that novel, La Tercera. The other thing is, when I write, I use what I call constraints or obstructions. I give myself a challenge that in some way sculpts the novel into being. It helps me keep writing. Insurrecto. The constraint was Googling. If I Googled something, I could use it. If it was in Google, I could use it. So it allowed me weirdly to be free. And in this one, the constraint was If I remembered it, or if someone had told me something, or if it's part of my childhood in some way, if it was real in some way, I included it. So the weird thing about Salugo was, on one hand, it had to be constructed through a different name, so made up. On the other hand, the descriptions consist, because of my constraint, it consists of real things, like things that I actually remembered. So that's a weird thing. So thank you so much for that question, though.
It's so funny, or not, I guess it's not funny, but it's so interesting how where we're from is such a part of us. Like, I feel that way, but I'm from Chicago. I feel that way. It's like in my bones. And so like, it's so hard to separate me from Chicago. It's hard to separate you from your mom's hometown. That's such a cool, I mean, it makes sense. Like, that's how
you could give Chicago a different name in your novel.
Yeah, with all the spare time I have to write a novel,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get right on that. My next question is for Curtis, author of romantic comedy. This book was so funny to me because the main character, Sally, is a comedy writer for a show that strongly resembles a program you might have seen live on Saturday nights. Why did you choose that setting for your main character, Curtis, and how did it inform your writing?
So I came up with the idea for the plot first, and then it sort of had to take place at a stand-in for Saturday Night Live. So my family, really embraced television in general, and Saturday Night Live specifically during the pandemic. And I noticed, which I know a lot of other people have, this phenomenon of very talented, but also kind of normal or mortal seeming male writers or male cast members who end up dating or perhaps marrying kind of like transcendently beautiful, talented, famous women who come on the show as musical guests or hosts, like perhaps Colin Jost and Scarlett Johansson, or Pete Davidson and Ariana Grande. And so basically the premise I decided to create sort of for my own pandemic amusement was, it seems so implausible that this would happen with the genders switched, where it was like a kind of ordinary woman and a wildly attractive, famous male celebrity. And so I had the main character, Sally, writes a sketch making fun of it, like sort of asserting the same thing I just asserted and saying it would never happen for, the unfamous woman. And then that week on the show, the musical guest and host is the same person who's like a very handsome pop singer named Noah. And to her own surprise, Sally wonders if there might be sparks flying between them. So, and then the sort of little add-on is that, of course, once I said it there, I had to do all this research about Saturday Night Live, which was also a good pandemic activity.
There's a book. There's like a big book I know that was like I think it's like an oral history. I know that's it. Okay, plug for a book that's not even on the panel. That's how we do things. But yeah, so it feels very realized, that it really felt like you were behind the scenes of this fictional show, almost like a 30 Rock, or I think 30 Rock was a show that made fun of it too. So that part was so interesting to me, the nuts and bolts of making the show. My next question is for William, author of All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me. It's this great twisty mystery. I love reading mysteries, but I especially love when the author tells us who the murderer is before the rest of the characters learn the truth. Why did you decide to spill the beans early?
Well, I think to me, it was two things. I think one thing is I wanted to keep this as real and authentic feeling to me as I could. I like what Gina said about setting yourself a challenge and using that to structure it so that each book feels different to you. And in this case, the beginning of the book is about an author who's about my age and with about my history, looking back on his own life in a memoir-y kind of tone, a nostalgic sort of tone. And so I was much more interested in exploring the human relationships of the story than in the mystery. I feel like it's very hard to do something new and original in mysteries. It all feels so mechanical now. There's a body that drops, and then there's a series of clues and twists, and inevitably there's a confession or a revelation that solves the mystery in the end. And I find that kind of the least interesting part of this genre, which is much more about the mysteries of other people and understanding each other and knowing each other, which of course is what a lot of novels are about. So that was really kind of, it was trying to stay true to life, in which case doubt and not knowing is a part of crime stories. I've been in a lot of courtrooms. I've never once seen a confession from the stand. And even post-verdict and post-confessions, there's often a lot of doubt in these cases. So it was really just a way of mirroring the uncertainty and unknowability of other people, which is really the big mystery that's at the heart of most mystery novels and most all novels.
I hope that everyone reads these books after hearing this stuff, because I was trying not to be spoilery when I was writing these questions, but I also was like, but I wanted to know these answers myself selfishly. So now I'm like thinking about the book. I'm like, oh, it's all kind of coming together. The pieces.
Yeah, in fact, I'm not sure. I would quibble with the description of that the mystery is revealed at the beginning. It's a different kind of mystery. It's not a whodunit. It's a did he or didn't he sort of mystery.
Right.
Which is something that parallels my last book, which was called Defending Jacob, which was sort of a more conventional courtroom sort of story. But that's one way that's another sort of category of mysteries besides the traditional Agatha Christie style, where there's an array of suspects to choose from.
Yeah, it definitely threw me for a loop, because it didn't progress the way I thought it would. And so that's always delightful when you're reading a book, when it's like, oh, I was surprised by this. That doesn't always happen. So it was really interesting to read.
Great, thank you.
My next question is for Brendan, author of Symphony of Secrets. There's a character, and again, I'm trying not to get into spoilers, but there's a character that has a unique way to communicate and express themselves. What or who inspired how you portrayed that character?
Wow, that's a great question. First, thanks so much for having me here. Gina, I got to say, I'm so looking forward to reading your book. I spent a lot of time in the Philippines, down in Oriental Negros, Dumaguete. William, I watch Perry Mason every night. I always say, I've never seen anybody just say, yeah, I did. No, nobody does that. So I'm right there with you. It's good stuff. The inspiration for that character's communication, it really is, believe it or not, it's not very unique, because composers, one of the main characters is a composer. Composers use what we call composers use symbols constantly. There's always, everyone has a different method of how they want to compose and how they want to write, and what symbolism they want to use. So you could see one thing and from one composer, and you could see something else from a different composer, and it would just be like night and day. Some people say that it's just scribbles, but it makes perfect sense to you. And the way that this person sees the world is really unique, and they outline it. That's just how they see it. And when I decided how to do this with this particular character, I actually was inspired by several composers. I talked to one of my college professors, and he gave me pages and pages and pages of symbols that people had used, that he had done research on. And I'm just like, whoa, I was only scratching the surface. This is, it's mind-boggling what the human mind can comprehend. So I really wanted to expand as much as I could and be as creative as I could in showing different ways of communication. And the overarching theme in this book, in this book, Symphony of Secrets, is basically giving voice to the voiceless. So I really felt like using these symbols would be a good way to portray that.
I love the secret message like that. So that is so cool. And I have so many questions about this. Okay, I'm going to keep it moving, but that was a great answer. And thank you so much for sharing that and keeping it still kind of the mystery. My next question is for Gina. La Tercera is full of larger than life personalities. Can you tell us about any of the inspirations for them? It's kind of telegraphed by your last answer. I'm especially interested in learning who inspired Adina and Guapa.
This is my pandemic novel, and I didn't watch Saturday Night Live. I thought about my mom. So Adina and Guapa is really really a memory of my mother. And I'm going to start crying a little bit because I don't do books that are actually personal. And my mom died, I think, almost 22 years ago, but I don't think I fully mourned my mother's death. So Adina Anguapa is really a way to resurrect my mother that I completely did in the pandemic. This novel was actually about, originally, it was called William McKinley's World. It was a novel about the Philippine-American War. There were going to be two brothers. One was going to be a revolutionary. One was going to be a spy for the Americans. And it turned into a novel about my mother. I mean, so there's something about what the pandemic did. I mean, the other person who's in it, this Lolo Paco, he's actually also, I researched him. My mom loved this guy so much, her great uncle. And it turns out he was, he was an early collaborator with the Americans. In 1903, he was already a student in the United States when the war was still being prosecuted. America had occupied the Philippines in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. So her actual relative was this guy that I ended up, oh my God, everything that you said was true. I thought she was a liar, but it ended up being about her. It ended up being about the ways in which she imagined the world and the way she survived. Her life was quite difficult, given the constraints of Philippine society, but it was a memory. I was crying every day as I wrote that novel.
I don't want to make anybody cry in the panel. I'm so sorry, but I have a real quick question for everyone. Just put your hand up. Are these all pandemic? I guess they're all pandemic novels because these are pandemic novels, right? Cool. Yeah, so that it made everybody question stuff, unfortunately, us being in our houses and not being able to go anywhere. Who would have thought, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing this personal work, but also your personal words with us. It's so beautiful to hear.
Thank you so much for asking.
Of course. My next question is for Jay Ryan. Florence, there's another mom that's pretty intense in Saturday Night. Her name is Florence, and she does a stunt in the middle of the book that made me laugh, mainly because I have a few relatives that are just as stubborn. When you think about writing these interpersonal family relationships, how do you keep them both realistic and a little bit ridiculous? Because that's pretty much how I know my family is. So
yeah. Well, first of all, I just love what Gina said about writing her mother. I intentionally do that with every book. So I want to come out at the top and say, Florence is not my mom. Yeah, Mariel is more or less, but Florence is kind of an amalgam of the most ridiculous parts of my most ridiculous relatives. And it was a lot of fun to write, a character that to me was a little over the top. But as I've found in the past, when I write something that I think is exaggerated over the top, it gets outflanked by real life. Like, for example, the supper club in my first book charging $10,000 a plate. That's small compared to what some private clubs charge. But anyway, and I thought I was being like grossly ridiculous at the time. I thought no one would pay that for a meal ever. Like, oh no, within a year I was wrong. But anyway, with Florence, boy, yeah. I just wanted to write a character. I needed to laugh during the pandemic. And I wanted to write a character that made me laugh every time I sat down with her. Just like, what ridiculous thing are you going to say next? And that was a fun thing with Florence. And also finding the heart in that person, not just making them a stock comic character or a antagonist, but giving them, giving them opportunities to be generous and kind and reveal aspects of themselves that the passing stranger wouldn't see. So that was my challenge, but also a little bit of a respite in sitting down with Florence every day and saying, Florence, I just need a laugh today. Do something crazy, please.
I'm laughing because both of these characters, Adina and Guapa and Florence, are like maybe a little over the top, but it's also realistic. Because like I said, I know people in my family who are sometimes be a little wild. So like to me, it rang true in a way. She's so funny. I love her a lot. My next question is for Curtis. And this is a word that we were talking about this before we started the panel. I'm going to try to pronounce this word. I love epistolary movies. movies and novels, I guess, but I meant novels, especially when they use electronic mediums like email or IMs or DMs and Twitter or whatever. How do you make a character's warmth and personality shine through email, which many would find an impersonal way to communicate?
So in romantic comedy, as you're referring to, there's like basically the writer on the SNL type show and the smolderingly hot male celebrity meet during this week of filming, and then I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, it's 2018, and then 2 years pass. They have some chemistry, it's kind of ambiguous. 2 years pass, and then he reaches out to her via email, and the entire middle section of the novel is their emails with nothing else, and then there's a third section that goes back to scenes. It's funny because I think that and obviously we're all like readerly people. I think that some people would say, oh, to be in touch with another person, and like if I sent them a 4 or 5 paragraph email a day and they sent me a 4 or 5 paragraph email a day, like that sounds like so much work and then so boring. And then I think there's other people who would say, oh my gosh, like what a romantic way to get to know someone, and you can be more open. And I think that was an important thing. Like I remember reading an article a few years ago, which I think put into words something I had known but never articulated, which is that the way that people become close is basically by divulging things to each other. And I believe this has the very provocative name of being called penetration theory. But I had the characters kind of like, and especially because one of them is a celebrity, and putting things in written digital form is a risk, that when you start talking about like your childhood, or when you lost your virginity, or what you think of your own body or something, that does feel very vulnerable, but it's also kind of what brings two people close together. Although the two people might think, are we falling in love? Like, did we fall in love in person? Are we falling in love now? Are we totally not falling in love and we're just chatting because we're bored during the pandemic? And so it's supposed to be, there's supposed to be, just enough murkiness to keep it interesting.
To show you how corny we are, me and my husband, when we first started dating, he sent me an email about his softball game, and it was like a Sports Center, like his Sports Center highlights from this softball game that he played for work. So I understand like how email can connect people, even though we're way cornier than anything that happened in the book, but there is that connection. And I think the lack of seeing the person's face does allow you to kind of reveal things you might not reveal. So I don't know about the name of that theory, but I understand the point behind it. My next question is for Brendan. So there's two main characters. I would call him Burn, who is a composer, and Ebony, who kind of helps him do research and understand what's going on in the situation. They have such great banter, even when they're dealing with forces beyond their control. Like I would be terrified. There's a couple things that happen. I'm like, oh my God, I would just fall apart. And they're just like going back and forth and figuring it out. How do you write conversations like that, like the ones they have in such a realistic way?
Wow. I like to think that, well, first, the character Burn is based on my brother. So it's just like having a conversation with him. If he were sitting right here, that would be exactly what he would say. And as I was going back and forth during some edits, it's like, what would he say? I literally asked myself that. What would he say? If I asked him this question, what would his response? That's totally what it is. And the character of Ebony is based on a friend of mine that I used to teach with when I was working in Pennsylvania. And, again, same thing. What would she say? And just putting those two personalities together, because they're both so different. They know each other. Their personalities are so big and so different. Just putting them together, it was just going to be fun. And they always have a good time together. And even when, like you mentioned, things get a little bit out of their control and there's not a whole lot they can do about it. And I was kind of freaked out myself as I was writing it. I was like, well, how am I going to get them out of this? How am I going to do that? What's going to happen? And I just went back to the personalities of the people. And it's just like, I literally, every time Burn would speak, I would ask myself, what would my brother say? What would he say? And it really made it easy. It made it easy to write all of his dialogue. And, you know, and it was a fun tribute to him. I lost him last year. So I really wanted to pay tribute to him that way, just to kind of give people a sense of just how amazing of a person that he was. And it was a fun way to do it. And it was fun to write. It was a lot of fun to do. And I hope it comes through on the page.
It does. I think the fun does come through. I was laughing because you're like, oh, I don't know how they're going to get out of this situation. I was like, if you don't know how, who is going to know? Like, that just made me. A lot of people, and I want you to know, a lot of people in the chat are saying that Violent Conspiracy is really great. So, yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yeah. So I really appreciate all the personal stories that everyone is sharing. I'm like a crybaby, so I'm sitting here like, oh my God. So thank you so much for sharing that about your brother. And I think you did him totally proud. I think his personality, his spirit comes off the page. So
thank you.
It's great to know. My next question is for William. I enjoy the different perspective of the narrators and the steps you took to make them distinctive. And so when I say that, I mean, like, different narrators use different, of course, their tone is different, but also like the punctuation is different. The way that the chapters are set, everything there's little differences that let you know, okay, this is a different perspective. Which narrator, you know, with your discretion, was your favorite to write?
Yeah, I'll try not to be too spoilery here either. Just to clarify, the book is told, it's sort of 4 interlocking kind of novellas. And the premise of the novel is that a woman in the mid-70s goes missing and her husband is suspected of murdering her, but there's no evidence. And so it's about the slow working of suspicion in this family over decades, over a very long period of time. And so the 4 interlocking pieces of the book are told from different perspectives and at different time periods over those 3 or 4 decades. And so you keep switching perspectives. And I don't know that I would say that I have a favorite among them. The first of them, which is kind of a memoir-y sort of tone, is told in the first person by a character named Phil Solomon, who for most of the writing of the book was named Bill Landay. And it drew on lots of accurate aspects of my own life. And again, this was part of this idea of mine to try and keep things as close to reality as I could and make it feel as authentic as I could. It caused confusion among readers who felt like they were reading some kind of extended author's note. And so whatever payoff there might have been in authenticity was lost in this weird voice playing in the back of readers' minds saying, what exactly am I reading here? So we wound up ditching that. It moves on and is the other parts of it are told from the perspective of the woman who is missing at earlier parts of her life. You also hear from friends of Phil's who are kind of an amalgam of a couple of friends of mine who are sort of fast-talking, snarky, funny guys who I've known for a very long time. And the last bit, and I don't think I'm giving anything away because this is revealed very early on in the novel, is told from the point of view of a man with Alzheimer's disease. And that was a reach as well. And so again, picking up on what Gina said earlier, it's about, you know, setting these big challenges for yourself and trying to change voices. And also just, I think one of the nice things about novels is that they kind of train your empathy. They train you to experience the world as other people do. And so as a writer, you're trying to experience that also and trying to capture that. And so to switch voices and switch perspectives is really just kind of flexing that muscle and learning that as best you can.
That's why everyone should read. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, and the choir is going to sing with me. But like, of course, that's why we all read fiction, to get that perspective. I mean, I've never been to the Philippines. I've never written a concerto. I've never done any of I've never written for Saturday Night Live or something like it. Never been involved in a murder case, thank God. So, there's this, the perspectives that come in, and I really appreciate, and now we all know the secret that was supposed to be you. So, now everybody in this panel is in on the surprise. But like, the idea of learning someone who's not like you, a perspective that's not like you, where else are you going to get this? Where else are you going to get this?
I would go even further and say that if you are training to be empathetic, that makes you a better person. That's the whole basis of morality, is if you can imagine how things feel to the other person,
right?
That makes you kinder. And so that's why people who read novels are better people.
Obviously. Jesus, clapping in the background. Thank you so much for that insightful answer. My next question. Before I go, William, someone asked about unreliable narrators, and I think they were referring to you. Do you think that this story has unreliable narrators? It's so hard to discuss these books and not just tell y'all what happens, but like, what do you think?
I think a little bit. I think they're trying to be reliable. I think I wouldn't say that they're unreliable narrators in the sense that they are consciously misleading readers. I think they're unreliable in the way that we are all unreliable, in the sense that our perceptions of reality and of the world are themselves unreliable. We're often wrong, even if we are well-intentioned and perceptive in our various ways. So all narrators have to be unreliable in a mystery, if only to preserve the mystery throughout the course of the book. But I wouldn't say that they're purposely misleading the reader, because I do feel like that's a cheat.
Yeah, I think if I think about your book, I think they are reliable to themselves, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Like, they think they're reliable. So that's what really matters to them.
Exactly.
So,
as we all do.
Yeah, right. You can't lie to yourself. Well, you can, but you shouldn't, right?
Right. Often in error, but never in doubt.
Yeah. My next question is for Jay Ryan. I appreciated how you showed the characters in your book. It's kind of like a generational story where the characters grow. We learn how they grow into adults. You see some of them as kids. What was your motive? And you kind of jump back and forth. What was your motivation for going back and forth through time, rather than just having the characters talk about their past, or just having these little stories?
Well, this perfectly segues with William's answer here. Florence, in particular, is a famously unreliable narrator. I think she would actually look worse if she told her story to the reader without us observing it. By doing that, I felt like the reader could, for lack of a better term, walk a mile in their shoes and really see these people for who they were, and see the sort of forces acting against them and with them, without the benefit or drag of that person's opinion on that. Florence has cultivated her history into a bowl of lettuce she thinks is a salad, to paraphrase another character. So by seeing her in scene, omniscient, I think it gives the reader a little bit more of a chance to empathize with her and understand how she became the difficult person she is. And frankly, I think we all need to do that. I think there's people in all our lives that, we could stand to understand a little better. So that was my attempt at that.
I read a lot of advice columns, and a lot of times the solution is just cut people off. So I appreciate that in the book they didn't cut people off, but a lot of times I'm like, hey, sometimes it just does not work out.
Because sometimes you can't cut them off. Sometimes you just have to live with them, and as Curtis also mentioned, understanding what their vulnerabilities are makes them more empathetic too, and sharing or divulging certain facts about where they think their shortcomings might be, or where they aspire to have or be that they're not. So yeah, all that adds up to what William was saying about empathy. So yeah, that was my attempt at it.
And I think with William's book, ironically, but also with Gina's book, you see, actually, I'll say all of them. You see where these people are coming from. And so you're like, okay, maybe I wouldn't make that decision, but I understand from the perspective because the author has given me the understanding this is where this person is coming from. So it's like, okay, maybe I don't agree with what you did, but I understand why you did it. And so like, to me, that's very satisfying. Even if I'm like, why did you do that? It's like, okay, well, I get it. Like, I wouldn't do it, but I understand. So I think that's a very satisfying thing to give a reader. The next question is for Gina. And I will, this is a confession, we're confessing things in this panel. I used to hate history. I used to hate memorizing dates. I used to hate learning, exclusively about like, founding fathers and all that stuff. So I don't know anything. I didn't know anything about the history of the Philippines at all. I was not, it just never came up. So, but in your book, the history of the Philippines is a major part. Like it's just like, it's infused within the fabric of the novel. I learned so much. How do you approach using fiction to tell nonfiction stories like the history of the Philippines in your book?
Yeah, I really wonder about it because I only read novels. And then when I had to read nonfiction as a kid, even in college, it was like scratching, scratching a wall. I hated nonfiction. I hated anything that wasn't fiction. So I ended up doing a lot of work on history. For this particular novel, it did have to do with the fact that my mom liked this guy, her Lolo Paco, and also the fact that and he turned out to be a historical figure, he's in the US, Congress, whatever stuff. But the thing is, I grew up in Tacloban. So I grew up in the town where Imelda Marcos, who was our country's dictator, the wife of the dictator. So I called my town Imeldifix, people in my town. My problem with my mother really was that she loved Imelda. I mean, she's from that town. She grew up with Imelda. They went to the same school. My family were politician families. It was a politician family, and I hated them. I hated that shit. I mean, I hated the love for the dictator, the love for the fascist, but I loved my mother. So that is a problem, for a child, and it was a problem for it's I call it my Marxist criticism, self-criticism, for my whole life, that I grew up in that town that loves Imelda, loves the dictator. They still voted for the dictator's son. It's also a historic town in a way, Douglas MacArthur, when he came, so-called returned to Asia, returned to the Philippines, he returned to my hometown. So he returned to Tacloban. When Magellan came, because it's the easternmost part of the Philippines, Magellan came, he also came to my island. So there's something weirdly historic about this extremely boring place. I mean, it's so boring. So I ended up really kind of trying to figure out, because I'm a child of dictatorship, what is my relation politically to my world? And so history always becomes part of my story, because you have to understand the allegiances of those whose allegiances are so weird to you, like my mom's allegiances, through the history that made them, which is a colonized history, an imperial history, a history of horror, a history of genocide. Because there was genocide it was genocide in the Philippines, what the Americans did to the country at the turn of the century, from 1899 to 1913. So that's what for me, the personal is political, because I've been grappling with my mother for a very long time.
I mean, I think that's true for a lot of people of color. Like, there's nothing that you can see that's not touched by that. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's part of the fabric of the book. And I didn't really ask questions about this, but like this issue comes up in Brendan's book too, because you've got two people, Byrne and Ebony, who I mentioned before, who are in these spaces that are not necessarily for or not, I would say for, but where people of color are not always welcomed. And so like you have these moments where it's like, okay, yeah, of course it's political for me. And not necessarily because it's something I want it to be, but that just is what happens. And so I couldn't formulate a good question around that. And I really wanted to. But so like, it's so interesting that is coming up across like several books. You know, at the beginning, I was like, oh, these books are not connected. They totally are. It's so fascinating how this stuff is coming together. Thank you for that question, or that answer, sorry. My next question is for Curtis. I love how Sally was always considering her situation as a woman in a male-dominated field, which led her to write jokes that would be about women, but would appeal to everyone. And as I look at that, I'm like, maybe they didn't, because like there's jokes about like, you know, what it is like to be a woman, some of the physical aspects of that, which I won't get into, but you can kind of see where I'm coming from. How do you approach writing a romance novel that is appealing to people who don't usually pick them up, like me? I'm not a romance reader, I would say. So like, but I still really enjoyed your novel. So how do you appeal to people like me who it might not be their first choice?
Well, it's interesting because I mean, I feel like as a writer, this is my my 7th novel, and I kind of write the novel that I feel so interested in or sort of obsessed by the subject matter, which is, you know, an incredible privilege to be able to do. And then I think like the world tells me what category of book I've written. So sometimes the world will say, you wrote fan fiction, like with Hillary, my book Rod, or like, you know, you wrote a romance novel, or you wrote a literary novel about class, like, and it sort of, it depends. And where I feel like I'm bringing my same, you know, like self and brain and whatever. So in terms of, it's actually, romantic comedies kind of relationship to being a romance novel has been sort of fascinating to me so far, where from a very young age, I loved romance novels. Like I don't know actually even if Danielle Steele considers herself a romance novelist, but I first read her in, you know, 4th grade. I read Harlequin romances. I don't know if they're still called bodice rippers. I'm sure as a librarian, would you use the term bodice ripper? I don't know, maybe not.
It's a vibe for sure. I know but, the vibe that you're talking about.
But anyway, I think that basically in terms of like I hope my books in general, and specifically romantic comedy, I hope they appeal to you know, readers, but I think that to sort of, and I hope that this appeals to romance readers, partly because I think romances have such a special place in people's heart, where it's like, it's escapist, it's comforting, it's swoony, and like who doesn't want all of that normally, and maybe especially now. But I also do think, you know, as a writer, I specifically, like I feel like it doesn't work for me to try to like pander or almost there's sort of a balance between anticipating people's reactions and not anticipating people's reactions, and trying to think like, okay, I do hope this will find readers. I do not want to be the only reader of all these words, but I'm not going to try to like game the marketplace, because how can you? I mean, maybe if I could, I would, but I don't think I can. So I think it's just like the short answer after the long answer is like, I write what's super interesting to me, and then I cross my fingers and hope that that'll be interesting to other people.
I mean, like I said, it was definitely compelling in a way that I don't normally find bodice rippers, and like no judgment to anyone who reads those books. Please don't get on Twitter and say Ashely does not like, you know, it is what it is. But like I found it appealing in a way that I don't always find romance, and so like I thought it was really interesting. So I'm glad you were interested in it enough to write it, because I think I'm not the only one who's going to enjoy it. My next question is for William, and we kind of touched on this a little bit. One of the characters develops dementia, and I guess you said Alzheimer's, so I'll change it to Alzheimer's. And we get to see life from their perspective. What kind of research did you do to inform this character's actions and like how they were acting while they're affected by this illness?
None, honestly. My mom has Alzheimer's and is really lost in dementia at this point, and I see her all the time. I'll probably go and see her this afternoon. But when you go, so she's in a memory unit, a locked memory unit, with about 12 or 15 others, and when you walk in, it's hard not to wonder what their experience of the world is, what their interior experience is. And so, picking up on what Curtis said, you often write just following your own interests and your own preoccupations at the time of the novel, and you're trying to, work out your own ideas and thoughts through the prism of fiction. And so this was a challenge to do that. We talk about empathy, and to imagine the experience of dementia seemed like about as high a challenge as you could set for yourself. The other piece of it that's interesting, just from a crime novel and a criminal justice setting, is if you think about punishing criminals, what do you do with a person who has dementia? What is it that you are punishing if the person is so lost in dementia that they're really not present anymore, except the physical shell of the person? Are you punishing the person themselves, even if they don't remember having committed any crime, even if they don't remember who they are? Is it still moral to punish them for something they may have done or may not have done? So from the perspective of criminal justice theory, it's an interesting question, as well as presenting a lot of these narrative advantages and challenges.
I didn't even think about that part. That is so, I mean, it is mentioned in the book, but I didn't really let myself get into the idea of it. And so that's something I'm going to have to chew on a little bit. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then we're sorry, of course, to hear about your mom. I really appreciate on this panel how open and forthcoming everyone has been. It's emotional to me, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. You share your beautiful book, but you're also sharing a part of yourselves, and I think it's really nice to remember that and see it reflected in what you guys are saying. My last question is for Brendan. We talked about composers earlier. Frederick Delaney is a fictional composer at the center of your novel. He does some not great things in the name of art. How do you make a character like this sympathetic?
That is a fantastic question, because we all, it's been mentioned several times, about empathy. And we're talking about, people's perceptions. To Freddie Delaney, he has done nothing wrong. Everything that he's doing, it's for the right reasons. Hey, it sounds good to him. Why would I not want to do this? This is going to work out great for everyone. And we all have those thoughts at one point or another. And I really think that writing Freddie Delaney was kind of tough, because at one point I'm writing him and I'm like, man, this kid is so eager. He's such a go-getter. He's going to be so successful. I want him to succeed. And then, by the end of it is like, I hate this guy. I can't believe this is who he really is. When did this happen? How did he turn into this? And it really was an interesting balancing act, because on one hand, you could see why he was so eager, enthusiastic. And on the other hand, you could totally see how, for lack of a better term, the darkness encompassed him. You could see it. You could see it coming. And, what do you do? It's like, well, it's just one of those things that I think a lot of people struggle with. It's one of those things that you don't necessarily talk about, but we all have struggles like that. It's like, do I go over to the dark side for the greater good, or do I stay pure to myself because that's just what I'm supposed to do? It was a really tough balancing act, but I think it came out okay. And I think a lot of people are going to say, especially when they read Freddie's character, it's like, you either love him or you hate him, or like me, you love him and you hate him. So it's going to be, it's interesting. It's a really interesting read, but I really think there's a part in all of us that Freddie is living out in this book. Like in the beginning, he starts off one way, and then he's a completely different person when he gets to a certain point. And it's not so much that he changes, it's why does he change, and what are his motivations? And that's the question that we all need to ask ourselves, and we do every day. Why am I doing this? Am I doing this for the right reason? Am I doing the wrong thing for the right reason? I'll leave it to the reader to decide.
I personally hate to love, or love to hate him. That's what I'm going to say. Not hate to love.
That's good. I like that.
People ask questions. People were commenting in the chat. I'm so sorry. The questions were just so good. People had so many thoughts. So I'm sorry that we didn't get to everybody's questions, but I hope they were answered in some kind of way through what our authors said. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. And thank you to all the librarians and educators for joining us today. Next, we have 2 concurrent panels, book club picks and young adult book club reads. Thank you all so much. We appreciate your insight. We appreciate your personal touch, and we appreciate your novels. Thank you. And now I got to go look at all the back catalog and read all of your books. So, oh no, what am I going to do? Gosh darn it.
Thank you, Ashely. You're amazing.
Oh no.
Thank you,
I'm
Ashely.
just here to make
Yeah,
y'all look
you're
good.
amazing, Ashely. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It's
Great
so
job,
great to
Ashely.
meet everyone. Looking
Gina,
forward
I
to
can't wait
reading
to
all your
pick up
books.
your book. I can't wait. I can't wait to go back to Manila. I'm going to be like,
Oh, yeah.
boom, it's right there.
There's a dictator there right now.
Yeah. Oh, and Perry Mason, it's on every night, William. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
There's Law and Order. You don't even need Perry Mason.
Mm.
It's more fun. You know who did it in Law and Order. Perry
Yeah,
Mason, it's
true.
always like, oh, who's going to confess? Yeah, you never know.
That's the problem, isn't it?
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Bye.
good
Thank
day.
you.
Have a good rest of your day.